Have you ever wondered how someone with the most broken past, the most painful reputation, or the most unlikely background could become part of God's greatest story? What if I told you that a woman known only for her shame became part of the bloodline of Jesus Christ himself? Yes, you heard that right. A woman whose name was whispered in judgment. A woman whose life was marked by sin. A woman everyone else looked down on. God looked at her and said, "You belong in my story." Today, you're about to hear one of the most powerful redemption stories in the entire Bible. This is the animated story of Rahab. And trust me, once you hear what God did with her life, you will never look at your own story the same way again. The story begins in the ancient city of Jericho, a massive fortress city with walls so tall and thick that it seemed impossible to conquer. People believed Jericho was untouchable, unbeatable, unshakable. But within those walls lived a woman named Rahab. And Rahab didn't live just anywhere. She lived on the edge of the wall, in a home built into the stone, in a place where travelers came and went. Rahab was known as a prostitute, a woman with a reputation that followed her everywhere. Many people passed by her door. Some passed by in shame, others in secrecy, others in judgment. Yet God saw her not by her title, not by her reputation, not by her mistakes, but by her potential. While the people of Jericho were confident in their walls, their armies, and their weapons, Rahab sensed something bigger was happening in the world outside. Rumor after rumor poured into her home. Travelers spoke of strange things happening beyond the Jordan River. Stories of a people led by a God who parted seas, defeated kings, and performed miracles. Stories of a nation moving closer and closer to Jericho, an army that fought not with their own strength, but under the direction of the God of heaven. And every time Rahab heard these stories, her heart whispered the same thought: this God is real. This God is powerful. This God is unlike any God we worship here. She didn't know him yet, but she believed what she heard, and that small spark of belief was about to change her entire destiny. One night, word spread quickly through the city. Two strangers had entered Jericho. They were not merchants. They were not travelers. They were spies from Israel. And where did they go? Straight to the house of Rahab. Now imagine this moment. Rahab, a woman everyone underestimated, suddenly had two of God's people standing in her doorway, breathless, cautious, and nervous. They knew their mission was dangerous. They knew being caught meant death. But God knew exactly whose house they needed to enter. And he chose Rahab not because she was perfect, but because her heart was open. The king of Jericho heard the news within hours and immediately sent soldiers to Rahab's home. Knocks thundered against her door. Voices shouted her name. And in that moment, Rahab had a choice. She could save herself by turning in the spies, or she could protect them, risking everything: her safety, her reputation, her life. Yet Rahab did not hesitate. She hid the spies under stalks of flax on her roof and told the soldiers the men had already left the city. With confident boldness she didn't even know she had, she directed the soldiers toward the gate, sending them on a wild chase in the wrong direction. The moment the soldiers left, Rahab returned to the spies and whispered the words that revealed the truth of her heart. She told them she had heard of their God. She had heard of his mighty works, his miracles, his victories. She confessed that Jericho was terrified because they knew Israel's God was not just another idol. He was the true God, the God of heaven and earth. Rahab may not have known scriptures, rituals, or prayers. She wasn't raised in a holy environment. She didn't have a godly lifestyle, but she believed. And sometimes belief, pure, simple, unpolished belief, is all God needs to begin rewriting someone's story. Standing before the spies, Rahab made a request that would shape the future of her family. She didn't ask for riches or fame or safety for herself alone. She asked for one thing: that when Israel came to conquer Jericho, her family would be spared. The spies looked at her with gratitude and gave her a sign. "Tie a scarlet cord in your window," they said. "When we return, everyone inside your home will be safe." It was such a simple object, just a red cord hanging from a window. But this cord represented a covenant, a promise, a lifeline of grace. So Rahab tied the scarlet cord immediately, letting it hang outside her window, a silent declaration of her faith in a God she had only heard stories about. Days passed. The tension in Jericho grew. The people sensed something coming. And then one morning, the sound of marching around the city. The Israelites had arrived, but instead of attacking, instead of shouting, instead of scaling the walls, they simply walked. Once a day, silently, obediently, faithfully. And Rahab watched it all through her window. Her heart raced each time she heard their footsteps. She didn't know how God would save her. She didn't know when the destruction would begin. But every time the cord swayed in the wind, she remembered the promise made to her. On the seventh day, everything changed. The Israelites marched around the city 7 times. Their priests blew their trumpets, and suddenly the people shouted with a roar that shook the very ground. The walls of Jericho, those thick, mighty, Seemingly indestructible walls crumbled like sand. Stones burst apart. Dust rose into the sky. The city collapsed in an instant. But not Rahab's home. While everything around her fell in ruin, her home stood. Her family stood. God's promise stood. The spies came directly to her, just as they said. They lifted her and her family out of the broken city, leading them to safety, leading them into Israel's camp, leading them into a future she never imagined. And here is where the story becomes even more beautiful. Rahab wasn't just rescued. She wasn't just forgiven. She wasn't just spared. God didn't leave her on the outside looking in. He brought her into his people. He brought her into his family. Rahab left behind her old life, her old reputation, her old identity. She embraced a new faith, a new purpose, and a new beginning. In time, Rahab married a man named Salmon, a respected man of Israel. Together they had a son named Boaz, and Boaz would later marry Ruth, another remarkable woman of faith. Their descendant, King David, and generations later, from the same bloodline, came Jesus Christ. Think about that for a moment. A woman once known only as a prostitute became part of the lineage of the Savior of the world. Her past did not disqualify her. Her reputation did not define her. Her mistakes did not limit her. God saw her heart. God saw her faith. God saw who she could become. And he wrote her into the greatest story of all time. Rahab's life reminds us that no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter how you started, God can redeem your story. He can transform your past into a testimony. He can take your broken places and build something beautiful. He can take your greatest shame and turn it into his greatest glory. Rahab was not chosen because she was perfect. She was chosen because she believed. And that simple act of faith changed everything. So if you ever feel like your past is too messy, your mistakes too big, your story too stained, remember Rahab. Remember the scarlet cord hanging in her window. Remember the God who sees beyond your reputation and looks straight into your heart. If God can take a woman trapped in darkness and make her part of the bloodline of Jesus, then imagine what he can do with your life when you trust him, when you believe him, and when you take that first small step of faith toward him. Rahab's story is not just a story of rescue. It is a story of transformation, a story of courage, a story of redemption, a story of a woman who said yes to God at the moment it mattered most. And today, as you finish hearing her journey, I hope something rises in your heart to hope that God is not finished with you. Faith that your story can still be rewritten. and confidence that nothing in your past is too powerful for God to redeem. Because just like Rahab, you are never too far for God to reach you, restore you, and rewrite your story. And this is where we close the story of Rahab, the woman whose faith turned her from a life of shame into a place of honor. The woman once known as a prostitute who became part of the bloodline of the King of Kings. The woman who shows us that God can take anyone, absolutely anyone, and make their story beautiful.